Hello and welcome everybody to our Alternative Berry Production System webinar organized by UW-Madison and the University of Minnesota Extension. My name is Amaya Tucha. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Horticulture at UW-Madison, and I'm also a fruit crop specialist. And today we're really excited about this webinar on honeyberry production. And we are especially excited and thankful to have Jim Riddle that will be our speaker for today. Jim has been an organic farmer, gardener, inspector, educator, policy analyst, author, speaker, and avid organic eater. Jim was founding chair of the Winona Farmers Market Association and the International Organic Inspector Association, and a co-author of the International Organic Inspection Manual. Jim served as the chair of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Organic Advisory Task Force and was instrumental in the passage of Minnesota's landmark organic certification cost share program, which now is a farm bill program that provides partial reimbursement for organic certification costs nationwide. Jim worked for the University of Minnesota as an organic outreach coordinator and as organic research grant coordinator for the Ceres Trust. Jim co-owns and operates Blue Fruit Farm, where he and his wife grow blueberries, blackcurrants, elderberry, aronia berries, honeyberries, and more. Jim and Joyce were named the 2019 Moses Organic Farmer of the Year, and in 2013 received the EcoFarm's coveted Cities Award. In 2017, Jim received Beyond Pesticide Dragonfly Award for leading the nation in advancing organic integrity through policy and practice. Jim served on the leadership team of the eOrganic, the National Extension Community of Practice for Organic Agriculture, and was the steering committee chair during the formation of the Organic Farmers Association. Jim is the former chair of the USDA National Organic Standard Board and a leading voice for organic agriculture. We're beyond excited to have you here sharing all your knowledge about honeyberries, and I'm just going to give a couple of instructions to the attendants before we give the microphone to Jim. First of all, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I will be monitoring them and we will be asking Jim the questions at the very end so we don't interrupt him. We will have a small little poll at the very end before we start the questions. And I will be adding into the chat some of the links where you can find the recording of this webinar if you want to go back to review some of the information. I would also please ask everybody to stay muted and with their videos off. Thank you, and Jim, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Amaya. I'm trying to share my screen. Not finding it. I don't like this.
Don't worry, we always struggle with this, even though we're all the time using Zoom. It just always seems to be something.
I have my PowerPoint open on my screen, but now I've lost the Zoom screen. There's the Zoom screen. Yeah, please bear with me here. This is
well, we're still having people join it, so we can take a couple of minutes under the min.
Well, it says participants can now see my screen.
Yeah. And if you put them in presenter view, that will work. Now we can.
Is that it?
Perfect. There you go.
Okay, honeyberries, oh my. Exactly. So thank you, Amaya, for the introduction, and thank you to the University of Wisconsin and University of Minnesota Extension for inviting me to speak today on honeyberries, which is I think a very exciting fruit to now be able to grow in the upper Midwest. My wife Joyce and I own and operate Blue Fruit Farm, and the land where we're located, it's about a 5-acre field that has been managed organically since the mid-1970s. We farmed it in the 1980s and early 1990s, doing organic annual crops, vegetables, and selling at the Winona Farmers Market. But we got very involved in inspecting other organic farms and then training inspectors, and gave up our farming of this land, rented it out to someone else. They put up the 8-foot high deer fence, rented it for a number of years. But when they pulled out in 2000, at the end of 2007, we were left with a 5-acre field that was protected from the deer, just growing weeds. And Joyce had the idea, let's grow blueberries. And I said, that's an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing to do because we have dolomitic soils, pretty neutral pH of about 6.8 to 7. Blueberries like a pH around 5 or 5.5. So I knew if we were going to be successful with blueberries, we'd have to really do a lot of work to lower the pH. So I said, well, we can do that. We can grow blueberries, but I'd also like to grow some crops, some fruits that like our soil the way it is. So we got into aronia, elderberry, black currants, and then eventually have added honeyberries to our mix. And we do grow blueberries. Don't those look delicious? And we have about 1,600 blueberry plants. So it is our largest planting. People tell us just consistently that our blueberries taste the best of any they've ever eaten. They're just packed with flavor. And they say, we even buy organic blueberries and yours taste so much better. Why is that? Well, I hate to break it to people, but many of the organic blueberries sold now are actually grown hydroponically. They aren't grown in soil at all. So if you buy Driscoll's, for instance, organic blueberries, they're grown in pots filled with sterilized coconut fibers and just given a nutrient solution. They aren't real blueberries, so of course they aren't going to have the flavor like our field grown in healthy, vibrant soil blueberries do. So anyway, that we also grow aronia berries, otherwise known as the black chokeberry. We have black currants. We don't have red currants or white currants, just black currants. Blueberries, a number of varieties of elderberries. The honeyberries I'll be talking about. We also have some both red and blue plum trees, and then quite a few different native prairie plants that we harvest seed. So it's a very diverse farm. But after doing annual crops for so many years, when we got back into farming, we wanted to do perennials. With the changing weather, extreme weather, doing annuals we saw as very problematic. And one of the advantages with growing perennial fruits is once you've done the original establishment, and we did several years of cover cropping to try and get weeds under control and build the soil organic matter and tilled under different types of cover crops. But once they're established, there's really not much tillage except for weed control right around the bushes. So you really are eliminating both wind and water erosion. And these fruits are very healthy. So high antioxidants, high vitamin C, and the elderberries having antiviral properties as well. And they have just intense flavors full of bioflavonoids. They have a lot of market potential. I like to say that blueberries are hard to grow, but they sell themselves. The other things are easier to grow, but we have to sell them because a lot of people don't know what a real black currant tastes like, or they've never heard of honeyberries, and so they have no idea what they taste like. So it's a challenge. There aren't a lot of places to go for information about some of these alternative crops. I'm so glad that both these universities are really helping draw some attention, because there's not been a lot of research on anything other than blueberries, especially in the upper Midwest. And it's fun. It's fun to share these flavors. We have a number of school groups come out. We have elderly senior university groups and extension agents we share. And it's just fun for to share new things and learn new things. So some of the site selections for really all the fruit we grow, and they apply directly to honeyberries, is you need to select a site that has direct sun, that has full sun. Some of these crops, evolved in partial shade on woodland margins, but they really produce a lot better, much more vigorous in full sun. And they need good airflow. So you don't want to be in a kind of stale pocket in a valley somewhere where humid, moist air collects. You want to have a site that has good airflow, which is really important for helping prevent different fruit diseases. And then access to water, especially 2 times when you're establishing the young plants. If it gets dry, you need to be able to keep them irrigated. It's a significant investment, and you want to get those plants off to a really healthy, vigorous start. So anticipating having water set up when establishing the plants, and then when they are setting fruit. And this is especially true for blueberries, but we had a little issue last year where we should have watered the honeyberries. We hit a really dry spell. They had a good fruit set, but after the first picking, they really tapered off faster than I would have liked to see because we didn't put water to them, even though we did have access to water. So we learn as we go. But knowing what the proper soil pH is, and we do pH testing in the spring and the fall every year, and then amend as needed with elemental sulfur for blueberries. With the honeyberries, we've really just provided high quality compost. They are much more tolerant of a wider pH range. They'll do well in an acidic soil right up to neutral. So between say 5.5 and 6.8 or so, they seem to be do well in that kind of a range. And then you have to protect from pests. You saw in the picture the deer fence. There's also an electric fence for raccoons, and then the bird netting. And I'll talk quite a bit about some of the things we do to protect the fruit from pests. Pollinator friendly, and that's one thing I really like about the honeyberries, is they start blooming around April 20th, towards the end of April, when it's still freezing, not just frost, but freezing, and they can take a freeze. But the nice thing is when you get those 45, 50 degree days, early spring, the overwintering bumblebee queens start flying around. We have a lot of native pollinators, and they're looking for something to eat, and they find those honeyberry flowers, and they are so happy. So it provides a food source very early in the year for native pollinators. And then whether something else to think about is your location, and whether you want to design your farm or plant these as a you pick, or if you are going to pick yourself and sell either fresh or frozen fruit, or process them into some kind of jam, juice, or finished product. But you want to have a marketing strategy, but you've got time to develop that, because you aren't going to have anything to market for a few years after you plant. So some of the challenges, I mentioned deer, various birds, especially robins and cedar waxwings are the birds that seem to be attracted most to our fruit. Rabbits, we've had some rabbit damage to honeyberries, but really only the new plantings. So now whenever we've planted new ones, we put hardware cloth cages around them. You can't just wrap them like in a tree wrap, because they have multiple stems. You need to have some kind of a cage. But the rabbits will just come and nip the tips off of honeyberries. So you'll see kind of a diagonal cut, and the tip will be laying on the ground. It's like, well, you should at least eat it if you're going to cut it off. But raccoons love fruit, and they have a lot of friends. And you'll have one raccoon, and the next night you'll have 5, because they spread the word that the fruit's in, and they bring their friends. So yeah, we do electric fence. but we also do live trap and then send them to heaven. Mice can be a problem, once again, for those young tender plants when they're being established. And I already mentioned about the need to have water for both establishment and then fruit set. And we do have a machine shed in the middle of our field, and we catch the rainwater. We have about 6,000 gallons of rainwater storage. So all of our fruit rows have drip irrigation. And so we can use the rainwater until it's gone. And then when the rainwater is gone, we have a line from our well that we can irrigate with well water. Proper pruning, and I do have a slide kind of on some things to think about for honeyberries. You know, they're not as intensive by any means as black currants, which black currants, we remove about 2/3 of the canes from each bush every year. Whereas with honeyberries, it's much more just kind of a good haircut type pruning, but I'll get into that later. But the one thing to really think about, if you're doing this commercially or with the plan of commercializing the honeyberry, it's a long-term investment. You aren't going to get any return for minimum 3 years, more like 5 years. So you do need to be able to float the operation, either with annual vegetables or with an off-farm job or whatever. But you know, go into this knowing it's going to take time and investment and a lot of labor and weed control to really get those plants up so that they're producing a harvestable, marketable yield. There's a lot of hand labor involved, the planting of the stock to begin with, the preparation of the planting beds, but then weeding and hand harvesting. And all of our fruit is harvested by hand. There is work going on. University of Saskatchewan are really the leading breeding site in North America for honeyberries, and they are focusing on mechanically harvestable honeyberries. But so far, the varieties that have been released really are best suited for hand harvest. And I'll show our attempt at kind of a halfway mechanical harvest system too. That didn't work out for us. So you can learn from our mistakes. Insect pests with fruit, one of the big ones is spotted winged Drosophila, but here honeyberries are the winner. Of all the fruits we grow, they're the ones we don't have to worry about spotted winged Drosophila because we're done. They start to ripen right around June 1st. We're done with honeyberry harvest by the end of June, and typically spotted winged Drosophila does not appear until the first part or mid-July at our farm. So unless the spotted winged Drosophila evolves to emerge earlier, which they'd probably like the honeyberry if they could get their little serrated ovipositor into the honeyberry fruit. But so far, they haven't been a problem because the fruit are all done ripening before the spotted winged Drosophila appear. Diseases, we haven't had any disease issues at all with the honeyberry, so they're a winner there. We do have some issues that we have to manage with some of our other crops, especially the elderberries. But there is just a lack of knowledge and a lack of established markets for honeyberries. So we've done a lot of farm tours, a lot of tastings, a lot of, set up a booth even when we didn't have much to sell, just to let people taste the jam that we've made from honeyberries so that they develop, become acclimated and desire to purchase them. So think about that too as something you can do when you're still waiting for those first crops to ripen up. So here's our field from the entry gate before we had put up the bird netting, when we were still getting established. But you can see the machine shed in the middle of the field. That's what we catch the rainwater off of. It's all solar powered. There's no grid run to that site. So here is the a little later. You see that the black currants are bigger now, and we have this overhead netting and side curtains that we've had to install, and it's suspended on wires 9 feet above the field. And it takes a crew of 4 people about 2 days labor to put the netting out in the, when we get it out before the fruit starts to ripen, and then another 2 days at the end of the season, because we retract it and then wrap it up and leave it suspended but not unfurled over winter. And we've gotten, I think it's 8 years now of protection from this netting. But it is wearing out, and occasionally you get a big windstorm post break. So it's a job, but it saved us thousands of dollars each year in fruit that it's protected. Also, we use a bird guard, which we had this in place before the netting. It has a chip right here that is removable, and it has 9 different sounds on any chip. And so the chip we have is for Midwest vineyard pest birds. And so robins, cedar waxwings are included. So what the chip has is calls of predators, such as the sharp-shinned hawk, and then distress calls of someone torturing robins. No, that's not how they do it, but it's an alarm cry of a robin or a waxwing. And it goes off randomly. It's powered by the solar unit. It has 4 weatherproof speakers mounted on the 4 corners of that building. And we turn it on whenever we're done for the day. It shuts off at night, has electric eye, comes on first thing in the morning, and then it's pretty obnoxious. So it's like the first thing we shut off when we get into the field, because we can't stand listening to it while we're working there. But it helps. It helps. The other thing we've done is last year, right about this time, March 31st, we mounted on the top of that machine shed a laser unit, and it has its own solar power. So there's a photovoltaic panel. It has its own battery bank down inside the shed. And then on top of it is this laser gun, which looks kind of like a traffic camera. It shoots a green dot that moves up and down the rows, and birds see that laser coming and they see it as a predator. It's not that it blinds them or kills them or harms them in any way. They see this movement coming towards them, and essentially they are trained by the laser that this is an unsafe place to eat. So that's kind of the theory of how it works. This is our farm manager, Ben, and my wife, Joyce, with the guy from the bird control group, learning how to program it. So Ben operates it just from his smartphone, and you can have it just go up and down one row. You can have it circumnavigate the entire field. So we have different programs, like for the 4 rows that have honeyberries in them. Since they're the first fruit to form fruit and ripen, we target them, and we're going to increase how we use it. We had 1 year of experience, and I do want to give credit to the SARE program. We got a SARE grant, as well as the Lake Winds Food Co-op Farmer Field Fund, because it was an investment about $12,000 for protecting our 5 acres. So it really wasn't in our cash flow for last year. We couldn't have done it without that grant support. I would say that it helped, but we had 2 rows of Juneberries. Juneberries are a very sweet, high protein fruit. They have a prominent seed, and they're like a bird magnet. and the cedar waxwings just come for them. I've seen them dive bomb the netting trying to get into the field. And we were hoping that the laser would keep them out, and it didn't. And then once they started to come, then we were worried they were going to start getting the blueberries, which are much more of a income producer for us. So now we've actually done two things. We have pulled up those 40 June berries, so we no longer have June berries. They just weren't worth it to us, even though they're delicious. And I encourage people to keep trying them. Saskatoons or service berries, other names for them. But in our situation, they were causing more trouble than they were worth. But also, we intend to start running the laser on that part of the field, where 21 rows of blueberries are located, much earlier when the blueberries are still green, and train those birds to stay out. And so hopefully we won't have to cover that with the netting. But last year we ended up having to pull the netting over and really save the crop. Another innovation we've done, and this, I'll get to honeyberries here in a moment, is we now have what's called a Wilsey Weeder. It mounts on the back of the tractor. Someone rides on it. It has an arm with a rotating cylinder with aggressive teeth that then we can go down the rows and do mechanical weed control in the rows where we don't have landscape fabric mulching. And the blueberries have really responded to this unit. And then we do cover cropping after we've gotten a good weed kill and worked in the compost. Then we come back with cover crop seeds of annual ryegrass, white Dutch clover, and purple top turnips. Low growing, they're not going to compete with the blueberries, but they're going to protect the soil surface and add organic matter. So we're not just leaving it black. Anyway, on to the honeyberries, otherwise known as haskaps. That's primarily how they're known in Canada, or blue honeysuckle. And they're called honeyberry, not because they're as sweet as honey, but because they're in the same genus as the honeysuckle, Lonicera. They are not native to North America, but they're very similar to a native called mountain fly honeysuckle that's found in northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota. There are quite a few different named varieties, and I'll get into what varieties we're growing, but names like Aurora and Borealis are a couple of them. As I said, they ripen quite early, before strawberries. So that's pretty early, about 2 weeks before strawberries ripen. And amazing thing about them, they're good for either fresh eating or processing. So you can just eat them when they're fully ripe, right out of hand, and they have a little zing to them. People ask me what the flavor is like, and I compare them to a slightly underripe blueberry. They have a nice rich flavor, but there is some tartness to them. And they make just incredible jam. They make wonderful jams or sauces, and are great mixed with other fruit because they're just packed with flavor. I don't know if I mentioned, but they're known as the fruit of long life. They have the highest antioxidant levels of anything we grow. People think blueberries are high in antioxidants. Well, they pale in comparison to aronia, and aronia pales compared to honeyberry. Honeyberry has the most antioxidants of any of the fruits that we could choose to grow. They're very hardy to zone 2. I think it said zone 3, but I found out since even to zone 2. They've been grown for many long time in Siberia and Hokkaido, the North Island of Japan. And they do need a pollinizer, a companion that they aren't self-fertile. So you need another type of honeyberry, a different named variety that flowers during the same window. So there are some varieties that are early, some are mid-season, and some are later. So when you're purchasing your honeyberries, make sure and get 2 plants at the minimum, and make sure that those are compatible pollinizers to one another. And it's not like one is a sacrificial plant that only produces pollen. No, it produces fruit. But if you just have one variety, doesn't matter how many plants you have, you aren't going to have much fruit unless you have a matching pollinizer. And birds do like them, but we haven't had anywhere near the bird pressure on our honeyberries as we do on blueberries, or what we used to on Juneberries. And I think partly, as you'll see when I show pictures, the fruit is inside the bush. It's not just sitting out there prominent like it is on those other fruits. So they're a little harder to get to, I think, for birds, or they don't see them as easily when they're flying by. And as I mentioned earlier, rabbits can cause damage to young plants during establishment. But very flavorful, very high in antioxidants. So here's a young bush. This is the second year after planting, and they will flower in their second year and start producing a few fruits. But it's really by the third year is when you'll start to get some kind of a yield, maybe not enough to market, but you should start to get a significant yield by year 3. So here's a 3-year-old plant just starting to flower. And like I said, they'll flower. You can see dandelions are blooming in the background. That's the time of year they'll be flowering, when you still will get frosts, and even we've had them covered with snow when they're flowering, and they don't seem to care. So very hardy, and even when the flowers. So there's a closer up picture. You can see they're fairly prominent, showy flowers, and have a lot of pollen, which I think those, there's one of the bumblebees working that. I just love to be up in the field when they're blooming. That's coming up in a few weeks, and watch those overwintering queen bumblebees. They're just like dancing with the light. They're so excited to have something to be gathering both pollen and nectar from in large quantities at that time of year. So the varieties we grow: Aurora, Borealis, Beauty, Cinderella, Tundra, Berry Blue, and Bluebird. Now, when we first thought of getting into honeyberries, we got about, I think, 4 plants of each variety of Bluebird, Berry Blue, Tundra, and Borealis, and 2 other varieties I will mention in a moment. And we just wanted to, see what they were like. We didn't want to put in, an acre or even a 400-foot row. We just wanted to check out these different varieties and see which ones perform. Tundra and Borealis are very similar to one another. They're the earliest. Tundra is the earliest ripening of those, and it has kind of a firmer fruit, but they're smaller. Aurora is a matching pollinizer to Borealis and Tundra, but it has a much longer, bigger fruit. So we've put in more Aurora. Cinderella is very similar to the Aurora, and Beauty are a later variety that is one of those that's maybe being bred for possible mechanical harvest. They're more kind of a fleshy fruit, not as juicy. Berry Blue and Bluebird, we didn't buy any more. We just have, I think maybe it is 2 of each of those. They're much more upright plants, whereas Tundra, Borealis, these others are round. They're like 6 foot tall and 6 foot wide when they're mature. The Berry Blue and Bluebird have smaller, elongated fruit, and the bushes themselves are much taller in habit. And weren't exactly what we were looking for, but they still produce good quality fruit. There are 2 varieties that we don't grow anymore. We had 2 plants each of these, night mist and midnight blue. They were very vigorous. They grew really well, but the fruit was so bitter that even when we made it into jam, it was inedible. We had to throw out jam, believe it or not. We just couldn't eat it. And I don't know if you've ever tasted those red berries on a invasive honeysuckle bush, but just to try them, do that sometime. That'll give you an idea of what night mist and midnight blue tastes like. They're so bitter. It's not just tart, it's bitter. So we pulled those out. I had to actually use a tractor and a loader they developed such aggressive root systems. I couldn't just dig them up with a shovel after 4 years. So they really liked the site, but we didn't like them. So here you can see some honeyberries in the middle here. Those are the tundra and borealis. You can see they're very kind of round in shape. And of course, once that snow had melted or shrunk, it would be time to prune them. So we prune in late February or March, hopefully have it done, and aren't still doing it in April. But important thing, and this really are kind of some generalities for all pruning, I think, is prune when the plant is dormant predominantly. I mean, you can do some when things are growing if you need to remove some growth, but your main pruning occurs when the plants are dormant. And I think it's really important, especially with honeyberries, is you plant them, you let them grow for a year. The next year, you really think about that plant's future. What shape do you want it to have? And you'll see some branches are crossing there, and you've got to choose, even though they might both look really healthy, but you want to prevent having a lot of branches that cross, and honeyberries will cross. Their branches will crisscross, and you just have to make some tough choices and thin them out a little bit. So you do that. If you do that when the plants are young, you save pain later on. So some of ours, we did not do that, and we had to thin them once they were bigger, and then it's even harder emotionally to get yourself to, I just got to do it, and remove a nice healthy branch just because it's crossing and shading another one. So that's something to think about, always shaping plants so they don't have branches cross. And in general, to maximize sunlight penetration and airflow. The sunlight penetration really develops the sugars. Photosynthesis, you want every leaf getting hit by the sun to maximize its nutrient uptake, its photosynthesis potential, and to produce sugars. And then airflow, which goes hand in hand with sunlight penetration, but that's more focused on preventing disease issues, just so that the plant can dry out after a rain or after a fog or whatever. We like to remove low-hanging and lateral branches where the fruit might touch the ground, certainly get that branch out of there. But we do mow, and so part of it's for not so the fruit doesn't hit the side of the mower. But also, and this isn't so much for honeyberries, but other fruits, it's been found that the spotted wing Drosophila really congregate in lower bushes in the shadier, more humid part of a plant. So if you've got good airflow and you don't have those low-hanging or lateral branches, it can help prevent pest problems too. So here's some honeyberries, and unfortunately, I don't have these marked by variety. I didn't think ahead when I took these pictures, but this looks like the shape of the borealis. It possibly could be tundra, but you'll see typically there will be two fruit at each node. The flowers, that's how they grow. Sometimes they'll be single, sometimes they'll be triples, but typically there'll be 2 fruit, and that pair typically ripens at the same time. So here, nice branch. You can see some of these fruit are ready to harvest. Some are still a little green. But another point I think is really important about honeyberries, they're going to turn blue and look like they're ripe a good week before you should harvest them. If you pick them as soon as they turn blue, you're like, these are tart. Why do people grow these? If you leave them on the plant and let those sugars develop, wait a week, maybe 10 days, try them again, you're like, these are the best thing in the world. I know why we're growing these, because it's dramatic, the change that happens. So don't just pick them as soon as they turn blue. Let the sugars develop. So yeah, here's some more. You can see what I said about the pears. And some of I think this is a Cinderella, have more of a bell shape to them. And this would be the beauty, which is, you can see it's more compact and firm, being bred for potential mechanical harvest. And these are those blue bird and berry blue bushes, much more upright growth habit. And here is either a tundra or borealis. You can see it's much more spreading. And I see a couple branches that we should have pruned off that are going sideways. I always see that. And here's one of our harvest crews. It varies year to year, but typically everything is hand harvested, and a combination of high school students, college students that live in the area, and some teachers who are off in the summer looking for work. So that we haven't, we've been able to, it's always a challenge to patch together a good harvest crew. And honeyberries are one of the most tedious, probably the most tedious fruits to harvest, because they're under the foliage. So you really have to get down, lift up each branch, and look for the fruit under there. Whereas black currants, blueberries, they're right out there staring in the face, and elderberries are up on top, 6 foot in the air. Anyway, and so here, these would be either Cinderella or Aurora, or much longer. But you can see they do bleed onto your hands a little bit. And we really try to harvest the fruit and instruct all of our pickers to detach the little stem. You twist it just a little, or kind of snap it as you pick it. It's gentle touch, but to get that stem to stay on the bush and not come with the fruit. So we really try to sell clean fruit that's free of stems. So here was an investment we made in what was called the wax wing harvester. And this device would, you push it down the row, someone has to pick up those trays, and then you pull them together with a bush just standing right in the middle of the trays. And the thought and the way that University of Saskatchewan is doing it is then they would vibrate, either shake by hand, or they had a machine to shake the bush, and the fruit that's ripe would fall off in these trays. You lift the trays and dump the fruit into those totes that are sitting in back. We tried this, and we got over half the fruit that fell off was green. And so we were not just creating a problem for ourselves of having to sort that out, but we were damaging our production, because those weren't marketable at all, and that was fruit that would have ripened. We just couldn't get the system to work for us. And so we did sell it. We no longer have that unit, but maybe it works for certain varieties or certain situations, but it did not work for us. The thing we bought with it at the same time was a berry cleaner. So here it's pictured, and Katie is pouring fruit. These aren't honeyberries. They look like probably blueberries, maybe black currants. And there's a stainless steel hardware cloth screen. You adjust the angle, and then there's a very strong vacuum setup. So small debris falls through into a red tray of waste. The good fruit slowly makes its way down the incline and into this tray, and then leaves or any kind of light debris gets sucked off into a collection bag. And that has been well worth it. I encourage someone, even for honeyberries, if you're doing this at a commercial level, kind of this is something you should think about having. And there's just a peek at my bicycle pedal-powered rotary elderberry destemmer too. But we aren't going to go into that today. But if you're interested in elderberries, you do need to come up with some kind of a destemmer device to remove the stems. So here's a couple of honeyberries that still were picked, probably a little ripe. That's another thing. When they're fully ripe, they separate. That lets go a whole lot easier than when they're on the green side. And you can't tell just by color. And I see one or two got into this package. But we sell some honeyberries retail in half pint clamshells, but most is sold through our website, people placing orders. And so every year that we've been growing honeyberries, since we've established a market, we have more demand than we can sell. And we sell our honeyberries at $10 a pound. So that, and we need to get that because of the labor that goes into the harvest. It's very tedious. But here's some data. Our 2018 honeyberry yield, we got 186 pounds from 52 plants. They were about 5 years older. So we were getting about 3.6 pounds per plant. It'd be nice. We should be looking at 6 to 8 pounds per plant, maybe even up to 10, but that would be a target. But still, the sales from those 52 plants of that amount that we harvested, each plant was bringing in $31.64. So that's not too bad. And then our yield the next year, or 2 years later in 2020, was increasing because the plants were getting older, 361 pounds. So each plant was yielding $64.52 worth of fruit that was sold from it. Last year, our yield was down. And I'm not including, we have about 100 more honeyberry plants that are younger, that are 3 and 4 years older. So I'm not including those here. But like I said, we hit a bone dry spell right as they were starting to ripen. We thought the fruit set had already happened. We didn't worry about irrigating. We should have. And I think that accounts for the drop in the yield. But still, they were bringing in over $40 a plant. So that's not bad. And then we do make use of Minnesota's cottage food law for home canning of both different jams and juices. We haven't had enough honeyberries to try juicing them. I think they'd make incredible, powerful juice, but we haven't had enough for that. But we make some jams from them, or mix them like with blueberries to make a honey blue, which is just out of this world good. And we sell mostly from the farm or people placing orders on our barn to door website system. but we do a regional food event in Rochester, Minnesota called Feast, which is in early December. This was before COVID, but you can see people just lined up to taste the jams, and just a very fun way to expose people to the unusual fruits we grow. We also have hosted a number of different farm tours, field days, helps other growers see what we're doing, learn from our mistakes, but also get a lot of potential buyers, people that are customers that want to come and experience the farm and try the different fruits we grow. So I think that's something to think about when you're doing alternative fruits, is you've got to put time and effort into educating people. So we also, I just want to mention the native prairie species that we have. They're really great for pollinators and predators, beneficial insects. The seed has high value. It's hand harvested, and then we market the seed through Prairie Moon Nursery, which is just located about a mile from our farm or less. But here's Joyce out in one of the prairie fields. So we have prairie plants in our orchard area as well as surrounding our fruit field. So this is butterfly weed in the foreground and New Jersey tea in the background. In amongst all those plum trees, we planted Hairy Mountain Mint, which is just like a bee and butterfly magnet. They love the Hairy Mountain Mint, and it blooms later in the summer. So it's providing a food source to help the pollinators build up their food reserves. This is New Jersey tea. As it's getting close to harvest, those will turn black when the seed is ready to harvest. Butterfly weed it's in the milkweed family. So you see those pods look a lot like a common milkweed. Here's a butterfly on the butterfly weed and a bumblebee. And then a monarch butterfly caterpillar just beginning to form the chrysalis on a leaf of one of the butterfly weeds. We also leave and sometimes even harvest the pods of common milkweed, which is another food source. The monarchs only eat the larvae, only eat the milkweed family. So there's one of the adults even getting nectar from a milkweed flower. Also anise hyssop, bees love that one. And here is showy goldenrod, just covered with the native bumblebees. We're certified organic by MOSA, and then we participate in the Minnesota Grown's organic labeling program. We're also certified through the Riddle Organic Project, and that's an add-on to USDA organic certification for farms that are growing in soil and for livestock producers who are actually giving their animals pasture, not just a window to look out of. So it's really farms that are complying with the Organic Foods Production Act, because those others are not, and it's fraudulent, but they are being allowed to be certified. But we're proud to be part of the Riddle Organic Project. Just a few resources I want to mention. Before we got into this, a couple books that really helped, general information, not a lot of details, but Uncommon Fruits for Every Garden and Grow Fruit Naturally by Lee Reich. Very understandable, well written. And you should be aware of the Organic Fruit Growers Association. There's their website. And then after that initial purchases of honeyberry stock, one from a nursery in Oregon, and I forget the other is like Greener World or something, we found out about Honeyberry USA. And they're located in far northern Foley, Minnesota. And they are kind of a pipeline to the breeding program at the University of Saskatchewan. They sell all kinds of honeyberry plants. I encourage you to look at their website. They have good descriptions of each of the varieties. They say what is the compatible pollinizer or different varieties that accompany those. And they sell more than just honeyberry nursery stock. We are not a nursery, but they are. So they have currants and elderberries, honeyberries, those sour cherries, lots of other things. And then just a couple years ago, University of Minnesota released a really nice book called Perennial Fruit, New, Unusual, and Unique Crops for Northern Climates. And you can download it free from the MISA website, or I think you can order a printed copy. I'm not sure if there's a charge or not, but it's a very good resource. But he underestimates the market value of honeyberries, I have to say, because he estimates selling them at $2 to $3 a pound, and we're getting $10 a pound and selling out. So don't just limit yourself by what you read. And then I just want to mention that this summer, we will be hosting our annual Blue Fruit Fest along with the Co-op Farm Tour on Saturday, July 16th. It runs from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. There'll be pick of blueberries, black currants, if they're still in season, farm tours, a food truck, and you can read more about that on our website, bluefruitfarm.com. So I thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jim, for all the information that you share with us. I'm just going to put here a link in the chat to where the recordings of the presentation will be posted. And before we start answering some of the questions that are in the chat, I'm just going to launch a poll, and then if people can just start answering, I'm going to go through some of the questions that we have here in the chat. The first one is about what are the typical Brix, pH, and TA ranges of honeyberries?
Okay, those were too many things in one question.
So Brix.
Yes, the Brix. Yeah, that's a good question, and that's not something I'm really prepared to answer. I do believe that on Honeyberry USA, their website, for some of the varieties, it does give what the Brix readings would be. My memory, which is always questionable, tells me that around 13, 14 to 16 Brix is what we're looking for in a fully ripe berry. But we really use our mouths more than just, we do have a refractometer, but it's tedious when we can just pop the fruit in our mouth and say, yeah, it's getting ready.
There was a question about the weeder, the mounted weeder.
Yes.
If you could repeat what's the name of equipment.
Wilsey, WILLSIE, Wilsey. It's out of Canada. They manufacture several different models, some that are where you straddle a row, and so they're more commonly used for vegetables or shorter growing plants. And then this is to the side, so it has an arm that reaches out, and it runs off a hydraulic motor. So you have to have two-way hydraulic and then constantly have flow from your tractor to the motor, and then the driver on the back can control the speed and the kind of on-off of the unit. And it lifts, and you set it in place. Our tractor is only a 23 horse John Deere compact utility tractor. That's minimal horsepower for it, but it will power it. But we've found that we have to have it up and start rotating the disc and then lower it before we go. If we lower it and then try to start it, that's too much stress for our small tractor. So we learned a few tricks to be able to use it, but it's tight spaces, and it's quite adjustable as far as the amount of depth, but it'll tear through even quackgrass. So it's pretty aggressive.
There's another question about nurseries to get the plants, and you did mention the Honeyberry US, and somebody actually did post the link there in the chat. Do you have any other recommendations about other nurseries where you can get some plants?
Well, we did, now places like Fleet Farm are carrying them, or just your average nursery where they sell apple trees, pear trees, grapevines. Now they are carrying honeyberry plants. But, do your research. None of those kind of places are going to make sure you buy a companion pollinizer, for instance. They'll sell you all one variety. Maybe that's all they got, So at least go to that Honeyberry USA website and learn. It's a great place to learn, even if you don't order from them. But yeah, you can buy them retail at a lot of nurseries these days, but it's not near the selection. And it's not some of the newer releases coming out of University of Saskatchewan. We did get, Rolling River Nursery in Oregon is where we got some of that first stock. But when you can get them here in the grown in the Midwest, they're going to be much more well adapted, I think, and you're supporting local businesses.
Great. There's a question about if you have grown indigo jam, and if so, how does it compare to Borealis and Tundra?
Yeah, we have not. So
okay.
It sounds good. And if I were planting more, it would be in my next order, but our farm is full. So yeah, I would give it a try. It looks good.
Any recommendations about soil texture / drainage preference for honeyberries?
Yeah, well-drained soil. So a silt loam with as much organic matter as you can get in it. If you can get organic matter levels of 5%, that'd be great. So if you've got a sandy soil, you've got to add a lot more organic matter to help hold moisture. The honeyberry plants, they don't grow in a swamp. They do well in a well-drained type soil. They aren't going to, do well if their feet are wet all the time.
Perfect. Any information that you could share about diseases on specific varieties?
Yeah, well, like I said, we haven't had disease issues, so knock on wood there. The one thing that does happen is after harvest, the plants have done, they've done their job, and they start to look kind of ragged. They will get a dusty, what looks kind of like powdery mildew, but it's not. They just look kind of dusty. They aren't vigorous. They aren't putting on a lot of new growth. It seems like the new growth is happening at the same time they're producing fruit early, and then they just kind of start going dormant, say by August. They're just kind of there. We haven't, I don't want to stimulate new growth. And that has been one thing with young honeyberry plants. When they lose their leaves, go dormant in the fall, you get cold weather, but then you get a late, warm spell, they will start blossoming in the fall. They get confused, and it doesn't seem to hurt them, but we have seen some of that happen. But it's really only the young plants. I think once they get established, then when they go dormant, they stay dormant.
Perfect. And we have a ton of questions, but another question I thought is important, and you didn't refer to this, is any recommendations for planting density and space between the rows and in the tree row?
Yeah, great question. I should have covered that. They're, like I said, they're around 6 feet wide, each bush. And so you want spacing at least 6 feet between plants. And even that, as they grow, they're going to crowd and almost become a hedge. So it all depends. Do you want to harvest a hedge, or do you want to harvest individual bushes? If that's the case, you probably should be looking at 8 feet between plants in row, and then 10 feet between rows. So you can get in there with a mower or something. We do have some that are too close. where we underestimated, and therefore we're pruning much more upright. So we're probably not going to get as high a yield as if we would have had wider spacing. But then we have more plants per row. So I think it evens out.
I have a question about fertilization, and if you have any recommendation for plants that have landscape fabric for fertilization. Yeah. You talked about compost applications.
Right. And we do have honeyberries on landscape fabric. And yeah, we compost and then we just hoe it in, because the opening for each of the bushes is, about 18 inches square. So there is quite a bit of exposed soil at the base of the bush. So we just kind of work it in, but that's where, none of our honeyberries are located in the part of our field where we're using the weeder, where it's just soil and mulch and compost and cover crops. I wish they were, because I think they'd perform even better that way. They have a very aggressive root system, so I wouldn't worry about causing damage to their roots with that weeder, with the aggressive action. But that sounds like a good thing for the university to take a look at.
Have you tried any fertilization through the irrigation system that you have?
Not with honeyberries.
Okay.
Because they look so good early in the year, and we didn't even irrigate them when we should have. So I think that might be something we'll look at, but really we baby our blueberries. And we take our honeyberries for granted probably more than we should, I think.
We have one last question here, is that if you prune branch tip after harvest to encourage tip growth / branching?
We don't. They branch a lot.
Okay.
With honeyberries, that has not been a problem. They're very branchy.
Perfect. Well, I think that those are all the questions that we have. We are about 8 minutes past the hour. Jim, I really want to thank you for sharing all your knowledge about honeyberries. I think we're all excited. As I told you, I bought a couple of bushes for my house, so we'll see what happens there. I know that they're delicious and that they are a good alternative for really early fruit production here in the region.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna.
I just encourage people to try them.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Try eating them and try growing them.
Good. So again, the link for where we're going to post the recording, if you want to go back, is there in the chat. And thank you so much, Jim, for sharing all this information with us and everybody that attended today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.